Wisconsin's presidential vote has often come down to less than 1% of the state's population. On NPR's Consider This podcast, we'll hear what's keeping Wisconsin voters up at night.
We need someone who's going to be dedicated to what's happening for us.
Wisconsin, where just 20,000 votes could swing a state of nearly 6 million. This week on NPR's Consider This podcast.
Heads up, there's going to be some salty language. Hey everyone, you're listening to Code Switch. I'm B.A. Parker.
And I'm Gene Demby.
And today we're talking about one of the most unfortunate news cycles we've been plagued with in a while.
That's saying a lot, Parker, because, you know what I mean? When was the last time there was a steady stream of good news? You know what I'm saying? The news has been pretty bleak for a while now.
Very true, Gene. But this really takes the cake for me.
They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. Eat the cat. Eat the cat. They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. Eat the cat.
Yeah. Okay, so this very disturbing viral TikTok song that you're hearing right now is obviously making use of Donald Trump talking about the unfounded, debunked, and yet somehow still incessant rumors that Haitian immigrants were, you know what I mean, eating people's pets in Springfield, Ohio. It's very specific.
And these rumors started on Facebook.
As they tend to do these days.
And Gene, on the one hand, it's easy to say that these racist claims about Haitian immigrants were just the result of a Facebook post getting out of hand. But we've seen so many incidents over the past few years of leaders in the Republican Party targeting Haitian immigrants.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump has made a lot of public claims about, Haitians having AIDS. He notoriously referred to Haiti as a shithole country, one of several that he named. And he said that letting Haitians into the U.S. is like a death wish.
Yeah, and I mean, all of these comments by themselves are obviously racist and anti-immigrant. But they're also wielded at Haitians in a particular way, I think, which goes back a long time because for centuries, Haiti has been seen as a unique threat to the Western world.
I mean, yeah, it's probably worth reminding people that Haiti was the first Caribbean country to become independent. It won its independence in the late 1700s. Haiti was brimming with, educated, homegrown political thinkers and leaders like Toussaint Louverture. The people in Haiti were obviously enslaved Africans, descendants of enslaved Africans, and they dreamed and they organized and fought for their freedom. And against ridiculous odds, they overthrew the French in 1804 in order to gain their independence.
And that terrified the world. It completely upset the colonial order. And the fact that Haiti wasn't just any colony, but a black colony, was the icing on the cake.
Right. A lot of the ways the slaveholders in the United States dealt with their slaves was because of a fear that Haiti could happen here too. And obviously we're glossing over a lot of history here, but it essentially meant that not only France, but the rest of the colonial powers in this hemisphere would spend the next 2 centuries trying to find ways to put Haiti back in its place. Taxes and tariffs through exploitative trade policies, and by embarking on a relentless cultural campaign to demean Haitian society and Haitian culture, and associating Haitians with witchcraft and cannibalism, violence, disease, chaos.
And those characterizations have filtered into pop culture too. The rare times that Haiti is depicted in U.S. movies, for instance, it's almost always in reference to killer zombies and voodoo. A caricature of voodoo, we should say, that often involves things like animal sacrifice, which brings us back to today and to Springfield, Ohio.
Right. Okay. New place, but same ugly tropes.
I mean, the more things change, Gene. Anyway, I'm going to get into why that trope resurfaced in Springfield, of all places, with the reporter who broke this pet eating story. Our play cousin and one of NPR's immigration reporters, Jasmine Garsd.
All right, I'm going to let y'all take it from here.
Welcome back, Jasmine.
Hey, Parker. Happy to be back here with you.
Yeah, I mean, Jasmine, you did break the story in early August about what was happening in Springfield.
Yeah. So even though this blew up in the last few weeks, I've been hearing these rumors about Haitians in Springfield bubbling up since at least July. It was a small percentage of the population that was talking about this compared to everyone I spoke to in Springfield. But it was there and it was vocal. I spoke to one woman affiliated with the local Republican Party. Her name is Glenda Bailey. And she very much believes that Haitians in Springfield are bringing in disease, that they're in gangs, and that they are criminals.
I mean, some of the Haitians are gang members. I mean, I've seen them.
These are very much the kind of accusations that we hear foisted on Black people in America, which Haitians are. And these are comfortable stereotypes that you'll hear. And I say this with the biggest air quotes imaginable. They're in gangs. They're uncivilized.
This is a familiar trope, right, in America. And it was interesting to see how these rumors started bubbling up over the summer, long before many Americans could even put Springfield on a map. After I spoke to Glenda, I called the Springfield police. I did due diligence as a reporter to find out if there were indeed gangs and if they had seen an uptick in crime in Springfield. And the Springfield police almost immediately said to me in conversation, is this about the accusations of ducks disappearing from the parks? Because that's not true.
What?
Yeah, that's what I said. I was like, what?
And then a few months later, the duck rumor was one-upped by the pet-eating rumor, which then got repeated by the former president of the United States on the debate stage.
I actually find a parallel, like a through line between this idea of they're eating your cats and your dogs and this Hannibal Lecter comparison that Donald Trump keeps making.
Yeah, I've heard he's been doing this at rallies, comparing immigrants to the infamous and very fictional cannibal from Silence of the Lambs.
It's Silence of the Lambs, okay? You know that. Hannibal Lecter. They're all being deposited into our country.
They're here to take what you love. They're here to consume us. And there's an inhumanity, right? I mean, we have established norms that eating cats and dogs and pets, this thing you love, is not human. And we have established norms that cannibalism has no place, right, in our society. And so when you make those accusations, you are essentially saying these people, these are not human beings, and they are here to take what you love.
So this week on Code Switch, we look at what's behind the Trump campaign strategy to demonize Haitian immigrants.
And migrants across the country.
Hey, it's Mike and Ian. We're the hosts of How to Do Everything from the team at Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me.
Every week, we take your questions and find someone much smarter than us to answer them.
Questions like, how do I safely jump out of a moving vehicle?
How do I dangerously jump out of a moving vehicle? We can't help you, but we will find someone who can.
Listen to the How to Do Everything podcast from NPR.
The candidates for November are set.
I know Donald Trump's type.
Between now and Election Day.
We are not going back.
A campaign season unfolding faster.
Kamala Harris is not getting a promotion.
Than any in recent history.
Make America great again.
Follow it all with new episodes every weekday on the NPR Politics Podcast.
People in Nevada are more racially diverse than a lot of swing states. About 40% of voters in Nevada are not white. Does that shape their views of issues like inflation and immigration? Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are both gambling on Las Vegas. Hear from Nevada voters all this week on NPR's Consider This podcast.
The day's top headlines, local stories from your community, your next podcast binge listen. You can have it all in one place, your pocket. Download the NPR app today.
Ever since these false rumors started being amplified by Republican leaders, there's been a media circus in Springfield. But you were there before all that. Did you get a chance to talk to any of the Haitian people that this media circus is impacting?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first stops I made, really, I got to Springfield, Ohio, and it was a Sunday. I almost immediately went to a local church that is offering services in Creole. And after Mass, I sat with a group of Haitian parishioners, mostly arrived about a year or two ago, although some people had just arrived. And we had a conversation about how they got to Springfield and why and how it was going.
Merci, madame.
And there were a couple of things that were really interesting about this conversation that very directly go against the narrative right now, right? I mean, almost everyone I spoke to went to Springfield, Ohio, because they had heard that there were job openings or job recruiters. So one thing I noticed from speaking to Haitians in Springfield is that a lot of them actually tried other Latin American and Caribbean countries prior to coming to the U.S. So the U.S. wasn't always their first choice at all. I spoke to one gentleman named Maxi Jean Alexandra. Actually, I sat with a lot of parishioners, and everyone there was dressed in their Sunday best, and Maxi was quite eager to tell me his story.
Que la cosa de nosotros inmigrantes, pero no tan fácil como dice ellos. Pero cada vez más se puede estar peor para nosotros. Cada país que nosotros llegamos son distintos, o sea, difícil. De mi parte y del otro lado. Porque la situación de los inmigrantes, especialmente de los haitianos, está terrible.
So what Maxi is saying is that every country he has gone to before the U.S. was difficult for Haitians. In his case, he went to the Dominican Republic first, and then he went to Chile. This is why he speaks Spanish. And in both countries, he says he encountered hostility towards Haitians. And so he heard about humanitarian parole into the U.S. about a year ago, and he was hoping it would be different here.
Oh, humanitarian parole. That means he's here legally, right?
Yes. So historically, Haiti is one of the nations that has had certain legal pathways for people to come into the U.S. And what's important to know about those legal pathways is that so they're legal, which B means you can get a work permit. I spoke to one young man named Kenol Camelu in that church basement, and he was very stressed out.
¿Tienes papeles de trabajo ya o no, todavía no? Sí, pero yo tengo.
You know, even though he did have the ability to get a work permit, there was like a tiredness to his face.
Sí, pero tan difícil.
And he explained to me that, yes, he's able to work, he found a job, but the language barrier, it was really quite challenging. And he was so eager to learn English and get ahead.
Okay, so most of the Haitians in Springfield can work here legally. But I have to say that people don't actually need to add value to the U.S. economy to be allowed to immigrate and to have the expectation of being treated with basic decency.
I'm really glad that you brought this up because I think increasingly the rhetoric is like discussing immigrants either as invaders or as valuable workers. And that's, you know, in Springfield, like that's been kind of like the two mainstream ways of talking about Haitians, either as this really dangerous invasion or as workers. Now there is a reality, right? In Springfield, most of the people I spoke to, they went to Springfield because there were jobs. Now that market has gotten saturated, and the jobs that are available require more proficiency in English. So a lot of Haitians I spoke to were desperate to learn English in order to access those jobs. I met one woman named Lucette Santimard. She was an older woman in her 60s, and she told me that it was getting harder to find work here in Springfield.
I'm working, but because I don't speak good English, I don't really find a good job that I like.
And so in some ways, I've been covering the Midwest for a long time. And one of the angles I've been covering with immigration in the Midwest is Midwestern business owners and business leaders really needing labor and being very frustrated because many of the migrants coming into the U.S. don't have work authorization right now, or it takes a really long time. And so in that sense, Haitian immigrants were kind of like really ideal for this region, in that they had a work authorization.
So then this makes no sense. Like, it benefits no one to bully these group of people. Like, so why is this being done?
So it's interesting. I mean, I guess on paper it makes no sense, but I think it actually makes perfect sense because,
Why?
Well, I think the story of Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, and of migrants in the Midwest and maybe even the larger in the U.S. is, in my opinion, it's a story about labor needs versus political gain. And, I think it's proven very politically expedient to say what J.D. Vance is saying, which is migrants like Haitians are going to ruin us economically.
Now go to Springfield, go to Clark County, Ohio, and ask the people there whether they have been enriched by 20,000 newcomers in 4 years.
Like a lot of towns in the Midwest, Springfield's population has been precipitously declining since the 1960s. We know this story, right? Population decline, aging. Over and over again, I speak to business owners in the region who need workers. And immigrants have, to a large extent, filled that need. But what we're seeing is they've also been extremely valuable for politicians to scapegoat. And I think we're at this crossroads where labor and population realities are clashing with political expediency. So we're seeing these lies being spread about, how people are coming into this country to threaten our very existence. And I think it's important to not get caught up in the small lies and be able to see the forest, to be able to see that this is all laying the groundwork to land a bigger false accusation, which I think is really important to keep an eye on, which is that undocumented immigrants could steal the election.
We're going to get into that. Stay with us.
As Election Day approaches, NPR's Consider This podcast is zooming in on 6 states that could determine who wins the White House: Georgia, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, and Pennsylvania. We'll ask voters in these swing states what matters to them and which way they want the country to go. Follow along with new episodes this week on the Consider This podcast from NPR.
On How to Do Everything from the team at Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, we try to find the answers to all your burning questions.
I'd like to know, how do I get someone to tell me if I smell?
That's the perfect question for us. So we went over to her house and we sniffed her.
Because we care. Listen to the How to Do Everything podcast from NPR.
We'll sniff you, too.
Once again, we find ourselves in an unprecedented election. And with all that's happening in the lead up to the big day, a weekly podcast just won't cut it. Get a better grasp of where we stand as a nation every weekday on the NPR Politics Podcast. Here, our seasoned reporters dig into the issues that are shaping voters' decisions and understand how the latest updates play into the bigger picture. The NPR Politics Podcast. Listen on Spotify.
Truth, independence, fairness, transparency, respect, excellence. This is NPR.
Parker.
Jasmine.
Code Switch. So is Springfield a very divided town politically?
It is divided, but it's really nuanced. And something that I think is very sad is that that is that nuance got lost in this whole circus of the last few weeks. Like, I was able to sit down and talk to people that are conservative, but who also acknowledge the need for immigrant labor. One person I'm thinking of is Jamie McGregor.
Third generation owner of McGregor Metal.
And he was telling me, we came out of the pandemic roaring, and it was really hard to find workers. The labor shortage was real. Mm-hmm. And he was saying, were it not for some of these Haitian migrants, I would not have been able to fill these positions.
So, I think this whole notion of migrants taking American jobs is hogwash. That's just not true. That's spoken like a true person that has never made a payroll or tried to, run a business.
And, he is a registered Republican. And he told me that he felt so embarrassed by the rhetoric. He said, this is rhetoric that is not based in reality. This idea that they're taking jobs. I mean, he was embarrassed, and there's a kind of nuance there. But he also, he expressed a real concern over, you have a city of about 60,000 people, and there have been anywhere between 15 and 20,000 immigrants, mostly Haitian, in the last 4 years. That is a lot.
In 4 years, that's significant.
Yeah. And so the city has a high poverty level.
Yeah.
It's what we would call kind of like the Rust Belt. I hope that's not an offensive term, but it's...
As someone who's from technically called the Rust Belt, I'm okay with it.
It's cities that they've spent decades in economic depression, and they're not prepared to handle that kind of influx. And so the people who are arriving do need services, right? Like, they need translation services. And so, there's this like kind of imaginary conversation that we're having about people eating pets and dogs and cats, which the consequences are very real. And then there's like a real constructive conversation, which is about labor needs and infrastructure and how to do this in a way that's intelligent and leads to the revitalization of these areas.
So, Jasmine, you've been saying that a big part of what people don't understand about this story is the economics of immigration. So what do economists have to say?
So most economists say migration is ultimately beneficial to a country's economy. One economist I spoke to is Professor Rachel Wilson from Wittenberg University. She's also like a third-generation Springfielder. And so she told me, our survival as a city which, again, the population has been going down, our survival depends on workers coming in and people spending money. Migrants don't just exist in a vacuum. They don't just come in and consume, right? People rent property, they buy phones, they buy goods, they inject money into the local economy. And she wished more people understood that.
Yes, so that's my thing, is that I wish everyone should take an economics class and understand that, like, there's two sides to this coin, right? So there's them coming in as workers, yes, and that has the potential to depress wages if it was happening in a vacuum and if nothing else was going on. But they are here consuming too, and they are demanding goods and services, which is good for our economy.
Professor Wilson told me that the new immigrants have been a huge boost to the struggling city. She said it would be a lot easier if it had been a gradual increase. And that's also backed up by research. Over and over again, economists say immigration is overall good for the economy. It's just the first couple of years can be really bumpy because it is a cohort of newcomers that do need a lot of assistance.
So how has the arrival of these new immigrants felt bumpy for the city of Springfield?
There has been a strain on local infrastructure. I was told something like 40 kids that don't speak English coming into the school district every week at some point. And this is a public school system in a city that is already strained. And I think something I've also noticed is, in general, like a tendency among liberals to brush off infrastructure concerns in order to not fall into the anti-immigrant narrative.
I mean, that, like, 40 kids each week, that is significant. But like you said, in the long run, immigrants help the economy, right?
Exactly. And Rachel Wilson, this local economist I spoke to, she reminded me that without immigrants, local people wouldn't be happy either, right? There would still be a strain.
I don't think Americans want to pay the prices that they would have to pay with a smaller labor force, right? Because I'll tell you what, if we don't have immigrants, prices will go up.
But it also seems like in some of the testimonies that you see that are like being shown online, just seem just mournful for a before time, quote unquote, when there wasn't an influx of immigrants.
Yeah, I spoke to a small fraction of people who could not see the other side of this. They were profoundly, completely anti-immigrant. And that fraction of people has really played an outsized role in the media in the last couple of weeks.
This particular chapter is new, but nothing is really new here. I think of these pockets in the U.S. that become hubs for community. Like I think of the Somali population in Minnesota or the Caribbean populations in Florida. So now it's Haitians in Ohio.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most basic impulses for human survival is to pick up and move when you are in danger. It's interesting, the presidential debate, the political discourse right now is completely focused on U.S. border policy and immigration policy as if there were not this massive historic crisis of displacement. And so people are being pushed out by poverty, by violence, by climate change. And again, it's not as unique as we like to think it is. Think about the period between like after World War I or after World War II. We have seen these massive displacements of human beings that seek out, a better life.
I mean, not just internationally. I think about, I'm a product of the Great Migration. So all of a sudden, my family's in Baltimore, and that becomes like a hub that we found safety in, like the Haitian immigrants in Springfield, at least until a former president calls them out as invaders.
Yeah, and that's why I think this whole yearning for a time where people didn't seek out safety and a better life in a new place is, it's ridiculous. It's not a real thing.
It's not a real thing. But the rumors and the memes that have been created out of this have a very real impact on the Haitian community.
How do you feel about the memes and the jokes?
Oh, I feel uncomfortable about it. I feel like there's a discussion about like how gallows humor, if it doesn't impact you and you're making fun of someone, then you're simply punching down. Then you're just tripling down on like the bully and harassment of a marginalized group that's just trying to work and survive.
Right.
So, like, these aren't Haitian immigrants who are dancing to their eating cats and dogs.
Right.
And so that means you're laughing at someone's trauma.
Yeah, so on the one hand, I understand the impulse to diffuse something so horrible by saying this is ridiculous. On the other, you know what I kept thinking about the day after the debate? I kept thinking about all the kids going to school and having to sit in the cafeteria. And I think the school cafeteria is obviously this place of like great viciousness and where a lot of things that the adults are saying like trickles down. And I actually remembered other immigrants in our school cafeteria getting bullied for what they ate. And I thought about how is that going to play when you are a kid, you're a teenager, you go on TikTok and you see someone dancing to a song about how your parents eat pets.
Yeah.
We're talking about something so normal, like taking a lunch break and not being harassed. And it reminds me of, like, there was this Haitian man I met at that church basement. Berthoni Jean-Philippe was his name. He was the youngest of the group. And he just seemed so eager to have a normal life, to move on with his life.
Even if he has that language barrier, he's trying to see if I can go to school and see if he can adapt here. But it's because of all this difficult situation in Haiti that they are running from that make this influx of immigration in Haiti. It's not because we don't like our country or anything like that.
I think that what Berthoni was saying to me resonated because it's so normal, and it's so run-of-the-mill, and it's so being lost in all this rhetoric, which is a guy saying, I used to be a student and I worked, and I just want to be left alone, and I want to get to be a student and work again. That's it. And there's something about something so mundane that can get really lost in all the vitriol.
We would like to be treated like humans, basically.
I mean, at this point, like, the town of Springfield has been inundated with bomb threats.
I know.
And, like, hospitals, schools, and I think, like, city facilities have been forced to evacuate and close following, like, threats of violence to the Haitian community. And I mean, I was disheartened. Like, they had to cancel their Culture Fest.
Yeah.
But we still have a few weeks until election.
Yeah.
Do you see this dying down?
No, because I think that there was some article about one of the main people who had made an accusation about her cat either being abducted or eaten, retracted.
I mean, like, wasn't she just in the basement?
Yeah, but I was just thinking this morning about, like, how incisive rumor is and how, it doesn't matter if this is proven untrue or that we know it's untrue. It has taken over the discourse and it has bloated the discourse. It's literally all we're talking about. And I think in that sense, it was very effective. And so I can see that continuing. It is continuing. They're starting to point to other towns, like Charleroi in Pennsylvania, and where there's also Haitian migrants. And it works in that it saturates the conversation.
What do you think the end game is here?
I think it's pretty clear at this point that if in November former President Trump loses, the grounds have been set to accuse undocumented immigrants of voting in the election. And you've probably heard this accusation, which is that Democrats are, quote unquote, flying in undocumented immigrants so that they will vote. And there's no evidence that that has ever occurred. I mean, there's abundant research about this, and many organizations have looked into it. It is not a real thing, but we keep hearing about it over and over again.
They're not citizens. They're not allowed to do it. It's illegal as hell.
Former President Trump frequently repeats false claims about migrants voting.
They can't speak a word of English for the most part, but they're signing them up.
That's not true. And there have been few recorded incidents of non-citizens trying to vote illegally.
People who are watching have made it clear that they're concerned that following this election, we might see challenges to the results if Donald Trump loses. And those challenges are very likely going to have to do with allegations of undocumented immigrants committing voter fraud.
I mean, it's hard to imagine that someone would go through so much to get here and risk it all just to vote, not to belittle enfranchisement. And again, there's basically no proof that this has ever happened. But somehow, the American imagination seems to always come back to this idea of immigrant voter fraud.
Well, we're talking about history today, right? And I think the idea of voter fraud has such longevity in the U.S. It's probably as old as the American voting system itself, you know? And I think this is gearing up to be the issue for this election, these false accusations. Like, all this extra rhetoric about immigrants this and immigrants that, I think part of the point is setting up a runway to land another lie, which is they stole the election.
Desmond Gars, thank you for talking with me.
You keep inviting me, and you know that I'm not going to have a good news. No, sometimes
you do have good news.
I do have good news.
This was just not one of those times. And that's our show. You can follow us on Instagram at NPR Code Switch. If email is more your thing, ours is codeswitch@npr.org. And subscribe to the podcast on the NPR app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to the Code Switch newsletter by going to npr.org/codeswitchnewsletter. Just a reminder that signing up for Code Switch Plus is a great way to support our show and public media, and you'll get to listen to every episode sponsor-free. So please go find out more at plus.npr.org/codeswitch. This episode was produced by Courtney Stein and Xavier Lopez. It was edited by Courtney Stein and Leah Donnella. Our engineers were Robert Rodriguez and Maggie Luthar. And a big shout out to the rest of the Code Switch Massive: Christina Kalla, Jess Kung, Leah Donnella, Dahlia Murtada, Verlin Williams, Jasmine Romero, Lori Lizarraga, and Jean Demby. I'm B.A. Parker.
And I'm Jasmine Gars.
Hydrate.
Cuídense, chicos.
Wait, don't tell me. Fresh Air, up first. NPR News Now, Planet Money, TED Radio Hour, Throughline, the NPR Politics Podcast, Code Switch, Embedded, Books We Love, Wild Card are just some of the podcasts you can enjoy sponsor-free with NPR Plus. Get all sorts of perks across more than 20 podcasts with the bundle option. Learn more at plus.npr.org. Wait, don't tell me. Fresh Air, up first. NPR News Now, Planet Money, TED Radio Hour, Throughline, the NPR Politics Podcast, Code Switch, Embedded, Books We Love, Wild Card are just some of the podcasts you can enjoy sponsor-free with NPR Plus. Get all sorts of perks across more than 20 podcasts with the bundle option. Learn more at plus.npr.org.